this is now, we're now in, I should say, the old Capitol Annex building. That's what they call it. Actually, this was going to be one wing of the old Capitol, when at one time, before the new Capitol was built, they decided they'd make two wings, you know, an east wing and a west wing. But after they finished this one, they decided, well, we won the suit with the federal government. They're going to give us $1 million. Beckham says he'll call the legislature, we'll get another $1 million, and so we'll build us a new Capitol building. And that's what happened. But this was going to be part of the new Capitol building in a way. Let me just go through here. We're now in what's called the Hall of Governors. And of course, up there at the top on the left is a picture of Governor Isaac Shelby, who was the first governor of Kentucky. Then we move along here. There's James Garrett, who we've talked about a whole lot this afternoon.
Right.
And here's a good picture of General Charles Scott, and he was at Valley Forge with George Washington in the Revolutionary War. So he was quite a famous man. One up there at the top is Governor Slaughter. Then we come down here, and this is
John Adair.
John Adair. He was one of the early governors. And then up there, why we have Gabriel Slaughter. Let's see now. I made a mistake here. This is
George Madison.
This is Madison, and that's Slaughter. We'll get this straight in a few minutes.
They just traded places for a moment.
Okay. Oh, and here's another picture of one of our old favorites.
Metcalf.
That's Thomas Metcalf. Hey, you know, that's a pretty good picture of him.
Looks like the one we saw a while ago at the Lieutenant Governor's house.
That's right. There, you remember I talked about the governor that didn't want to let Metcalf in?
Right,
old
because he was a
governor's mansion.
stonemason.
And that's Joseph Deshay, the governor that followed. And let's see, down here, why we have John Breathitt. And this is a nice large picture, and this is, you know, there were two Moorheads. This is James T. Moorhead that was governor of Kentucky. And here is, you remember I talked about the Whitcliffs down at the old governor's mansion? This is the grandfather of J.C.W. Beckham, who was governor. And there's another one up there, it's James Clark, who was governor. And then you remember I was talking about the bricklayer that helped lay the bricks on the old governor's mansion, Robert P. Letcher.
Right.
And he lived, by the way, he lived on the corner of Washington and Wapping Street in what's now the Women's Club building.
Okay.
That's
across
where,
from the Todd House there.
right, across from the Todd House. That is correct. And this one here is one of Governor Helm. Up there is William Owsley, who was quite a student. He lived in Frankfort on Main Street. Owsley did. And oh, here's one of my favorites. John J. Crittenden. Carolyn, if it hadn't been for Henry Clay, I suppose that he would have been recognized as one of our greatest statesmen. Of course, everybody says Henry Clay is, and I'm not going to argue that point. But they both lived about the same time. And John J. Crittenden, he lived on the corner of Washington and Main. You know, Dr. Boffman's old office there?
Right.
That's where he lived, and that building was built in 1800 on land that was originally owned by Aaron Burr.
Oh, we're really going back into history, aren't we?
But John J. Crittenden was 5 times United States Senator from Kentucky. He was twice appointed United States Attorney General. And of course, he was governor of Kentucky. During the Civil War, he had 2 sons. One named George Crittenden, he went to the southern side. And he was a major general in the Confederate forces. But he had another brother, and his name was Thomas Crittenden, and he was a major general in the Union forces. You know, Kentucky was divided. We were a border state. We sent 40,000 men to the Confederate side and 60,000 men to the Union side, and lots of times it was brother against brother, just like the Crittendens, you know.
It'd be very difficult.
Even in my own case, Carolyn, my grandfather was on the Union side, but he had a brother that went south and joined the Union forces.
I'm sure that was very hard on families.
It was hard, brother
very
against brother.
difficult.
So, John J. Crittenden, one of the most famous of them all in my book.
Very impressive.
Now, remember I told you about James T. Moorhead having, I believe they were brothers. If they weren't brothers, they were cousins, I guess. But there's another Moorhead that was governor of Kentucky, and there's Lazarus Powell. Let's see, who is this? I don't recognize this one over here, but that's James F. Robinson. Oh, that's a story there. James F. Robinson became governor because during the Civil War, when Magoffin was governor, he couldn't get along with the legislature because the legislature was controlled by the Union members. They were mostly Union members at that time. Magoffin was a sympathizer for the Confederate side, so he couldn't get anything through the legislature at all. So finally, he said, I'll resign, providing that Robinson will succeed me as governor, because he didn't like the fellow that was the president of the Senate.
Okay.
So the fellow that was the president of the Senate, he resigned. Robinson was elected president of the Senate. Then he was elected as the governor of Kentucky. And then and of course, Magoffin resigned. Then immediately after that, I can't think of the fellow's name just right off the top of my head, but the fellow that had been the president of the Senate, that Magoffin said, no, I'm not going to let him succeed me. They immediately reelected him as the president of the Senate.
The way things happen, my goodness.
This is another fine piece here. It's what's called a harp's
Piano.
piano.
I wonder how old that is.
They say it was made in 1860, just
My
before the
goodness.
Civil War.
That is
It's a
beautiful.
wonder. It's a wonder it got through the Civil War.
Isn't that the truth?
Beautiful
It is
piece.
beautiful.
We must be moving along, but I think over here is a gentleman that I recognize. This looks like
William O. Bradley.
Bradley, who was a Republican, and he was quite a famous fellow. There's, remember I talked about the Republican governor that only was governor a few months because he was elected in December of 1899, as I've said.
William Taylor.
But they threw him out, so to speak, and Goebel was elected.
Right.
Goebel, of course, was assassinated from one of the windows in this building, and there's a marker out on the walkway there where Goebel fell. And as I've told you, the lieutenant governor at that time was J.C.W. Beckham.
And he came.
After he became the governor, but Goebel didn't. Well, actually, he was shot and he fell on the sidewalk out there on January the 30th, 1900. And he lasted about 3 or 4 days. They took him to the old Capitol Hotel, and he passed away. But before he passed away, they swore him in as the governor of Kentucky. That's quite a long story. One of these days, I'm going to give another little episode talk about Goebel.
Well, I want to hear that. I know that will be interesting.
We must move on.
Okay.
Here's another gentleman by the name of Wilson. This is interesting to you. I have known all of the governors all the way back to Augustus Stanley, with the exception of a gentleman by the name of Black, because Black succeeded, I believe it was Stanley, when Stanley decided to resign and go to the Senate. And Black was the lieutenant governor, so he became governor. But he only was governor for about 6 months because he ran then against Edwin P. Marr, who Stanley had defeated. But this time Marr won. He beat Black.
Out. Yes.
And
there's Morrow.
there's Edwin P. Marr. I knew him quite well.
Mm-hmm. And there's James D. Black.
Well, there's Black. That's the one I didn't know. And Clem D. Sampson and Fields. I know the rest of them pretty well now.
Now we're getting to some more names that sound familiar to me,
that's right.
too.
Ruby LaFoon, my old friend Happy
Chandler.
And here's Governor Simeon Willis. Keene Johnson was a good friend of mine. Governor Earl Clements. And, of course, Weatherby is still living here in Frankfort, as you probably know.
And he was the first one to live in the lieutenant governor's...
The first one to leave.
No, that was Waterfield.
Waterfield.
Okay.
That's another story. You know, Governor Waterfield is the only lieutenant governor to be elected 2 different times and serve all 4 years as lieutenant governor, which is rather unusual. He was a fine man. And this is my friend Ed Breathitt. I was with him the other night at the Assembly Ball. And my old friend Bert T. Combs. We used to play tennis in my backyard when he was worked at the Highway Department before he moved up to Justice and Governor. But I've known him, of course, for a long, long time. And, of course, here's Wendell Ford. And above Wendell Ford is Governor Louis B. Nunn. And Louis B. Nunn was a Republican, but he was the governor of Kentucky at the same time that I was mayor of Frankfort. So I told a lot of people, I said, you know, I'm a Democrat, but I said, as long as Louis B. Nunn is over, I'm going to do everything I can to get along with Louis B. Nunn because he can do more for Frankfort than what we can do for him.
Yeah.
And he was fine. I got along with him fine. His sister in the office was always real nice to me. She'd tell me, look, if you want to see the governor, I'd call up. I said, I need to see the governor about something. She said, well, you come over here about 9 o'clock before anybody else gets here, and I'll let you in.
And she got you right in.
She got me right in.
Super.
And there's John Y. Brown, of course, and my friend Julian Carroll. And, of course, Martha Lane Collins. I was very fond of her. And that just about takes care. We need to get over to the old Capitol now because they're probably waiting for us over there.
Before we get snowbound.
Right. Carolyn, I thought you'd be interested in this. This is a bust here of Isaac Shelby, the first governor of Kentucky. And we're going to talk a little bit more about him when we go over to the old Capitol building. But I thought it'd be nice to come in here and show you some of the things that pertain to Shelby. Of course, here's a little picture of Shelby. Here's a razor that he used. And, of course, you can see the watch that belonged to him. And there's his pistol up there. And this is a telescope that was given to him by an admiral. I can't think of the admiral's name right now, but maybe I can go over here and maybe I can read it. Spyglass taken from the Queen Charlotte, a ship of the British squadron destroyed at the Battle of Lake Erie.
September 10th, 1813.
So you know that's quite an old.
Presented by Commander Perry to Governor Shelby.
Isn't that
Very
interesting?
interesting. And here's a peace pipe and a congressional
That
medal.
was given to him by one of the Indians, I suppose. But I
Very
thought that since
interesting.
we were going to talk about Shelby over at the old Capitol, that you would be particularly interested in seeing those relics of Isaac Shelby.
Gives us a little insight into his
extra.
life. Right.
A little extra tidbit.
Right.
Let's go to the old Capitol.
I'm ready.
Okay. This is an unusual United States flag. You remember I told you that we were the 15th state
Right.
to join the Union.
Uh-huh.
And you can see that's a flag with 15 stars.
So Kentucky is on there now.
On there now, the 15th star.
Right. Very pretty. And then after that, they reverted back to the 13, right, after that? After this flag, the government reverted to 13 stripes, symbolizing the original states.
Oh, that's right. They did have more stripes on this
So-
one, didn't they? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 stripes on this one. And they reverted back to 13.
After Kentucky. So we did
We
something,
did
didn't
something.
we?
That's right. We sure did.
Oh, very nice.
Very good. Okay, let's go. Carolyn, we're now in the Senate chamber of the old Capitol building.
It's very beautiful.
Yes, it is. And, you know, there are 38 state senators. And if you counted them, you could see 38 desks here. And these are replicas of the original desk. Now, the one reason I brought you over here is the fact that this is where the Speaker or the President of the Senate sat. Of course, the Lieutenant Governor, if he were here, which this would be his seat in his rostrum. But up above that, one reason I brought you in here is the fact that there is a very large picture of Governor Isaac Shelby, who was the first governor of Kentucky.
Very nice.
I thought that you would like to see that picture of Governor Shelby. And let me tell you just a little bit more about Shelby. Of course, he was actually elected governor in May of 1792. They had a meeting, the electors had a meeting in May of 1792, which is actually before we became a state. Say, we're getting ready. We're getting
Right.
ready. We actually became a state on June the 1st, 1792. Now, after he was elected in May, and about the last day of May, why, he traveled on horseback from his home at Traveler's Rest, which at that time was in Lincoln County, which is about 3 miles south of Danville. And he rode into Danville, where he received a very warm welcome, and they had a lavish banquet. He spent the night there. And then the next day he rode on horseback again on his way to Lexington, Kentucky, where the first meeting of the first legislature was to be held. And on the road to Lexington, why, he received a warm greeting. Of course, people lined up all along the road. When they got to Lexington, why, he was greeted by a military escort. He was given a very warm welcome by the trustee of Lexington, who was chairman of the board. His name was John Bradford, by the way. And he was sworn in as governor of Kentucky, and then he got back on his horse, and they had a parade on down to the public square. They met, the General Assembly met briefly, just to elect a few officers. And then after that, they went ahead and had a big celebration for the rest of the day. And not only that day, but the next day, June the 5th. I failed to say that the first meeting, actually, we became a state on June the 1st, but actually the first meeting, I'm talking about that when Shelby went to Lexington, was on June the 4th, as a matter of fact.
That was the first meeting of the legislature?
That's correct.
Okay.
But also, really the first meeting that you might say amounted to anything happened on June the 6th. At that time, he made an address to the General Assembly. At that time, he appointed James Brown, who was a brother of John Brown, as Secretary of State. He also, you remember, I may have talked a little bit about George Nicholas a little bit earlier, who was very important in the formation of Kentucky's first Constitution. George Nicholas was named by Shelby as the Attorney General, And then there was another fellow by the name of Percival Butler, who was named the Adjutant General of Kentucky.
Very nice. And all of this is just right in our history book, and we have Mr. Sower here to share it with us right now.
You're
Very
mighty
nice.
kind.
Very
I tell you what,
nice.
let's do now. Let's move on over to the House chamber. Okay? Carolyn, here we are now in the House chamber. I thought I'd call to your attention that chandelier. That's an original piece that was here when this building was built in 1830.
Very pretty.
Isn't that beautiful? Of course, at one time they had candle lights up there instead of electric lights. But
Right.
I guess maybe I haven't told you, I should tell you, this building was built in 1830. A fellow by the name of Gideon Shyrock, he was in his 20s. What they had some competition among architects as to the very best looking building for a capital that the architects could come up with. He was only in his 20s when he won the competition to build this fine building. Also, I thought while I'm talking about the capitals, you know, this is the third capital of Kentucky. The first capital was built about 1793 right on this site, and it burned about 1813. And then almost immediately they started building another one, and it burned about 1824, I believe it was. So then they got together and said, okay, we're going to build one more. And each time they did that, the people of Frankfort sort of had to put up a fight to keep it here because, again, Lexington would like to have it, Louisville would like to have
Competition.
it. Yeah, for the capital of Kentucky. And as a matter of fact, it is said that the Jefferson County Courthouse was built by the people down there in Louisville, hoping that it would actually serve as the capital of Kentucky, the building, you know.
Oh, how interesting.
But,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, but each time they tried to take it away from Frankfort, the Frankfort people, you know, we often disagree on a lot of subjects, but when it comes to the capital, we all got together.
Staying there together.
And every time they looked like they were going to make an effort to take it away from us, we always had some support from the rural counties. You know, the rural counties, I guess, maybe didn't want Louisville to have it or Lexington.
Right.
They'd rather have a smaller town to take over as the capital of Kentucky. But this is the third capital, and of course it was built in, as I've said before, in 1830. You know, the new Capitol building up on the hill across the river in South Frankfort, it was dedicated on June the 1st, 1910. The year I was born.
Right, 10-10.
Let's sit down and talk a little bit
okay.
more before we go.
Mayor Sower, we were talking about the first legislature. When they met, what was one of the most important pieces of legislation that they discussed?
Well, there were really two very important pieces of legislation that came out of the first session of the legislature. And that was the enactment of a judicial system, of course, and the other was to pick a site for the capital of Kentucky. Now, Carolyn, the manner in which they went about selecting the site was most unusual. The Constitution provided that the members of the General Assembly, and actually in the lower house, that they would choose by ballot 21 delegates to pick the site of the capital of Kentucky. And the two counties of Fayette and Mercer County were accorded the privilege then of alternately striking out one delegate until only 5 delegates remained. It was to be a commission or 5 delegates to pick the site of the capital of Kentucky. And also, at that time, the legislature, in the appointment of these 5 delegates, said that they must take into serious consideration the economic standpoint and any kind of monetary consideration that particular place, that site would give to become the capital of Kentucky. So it was important. They had the five delegates. I must tell you this: the five delegates that won the election were a fellow by the name of Robert Todd from Fayette County. There was another fellow by the name of Thomas Kennedy, and he was from Madison County. Another delegate was named Henry Lee, and he was from Mason County. Then there were two delegates from Bourbon County. One was named John Allen, and the other was my great-great-great-grandfather, John Edwards.
My
Both of them, of
goodness.
course, were from Bourbon County.
Oh, your family all the way back to the beginning. I'm impressed.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, now, who put together the proposal to get Frankfort to be the capital?
Well, actually, of course, these five delegates met early in August of 1792, and at that time, they visited and evaluated 8 different proposals to be the capital. And remember, I told you, I think, over at the old governor's mansion, we were all surprised that Danville did not present a proposal.
Right.
In the proposals, there was a fellow by the name of Ledgerwood, and he proposed a site near Ledgerwood's Junction, which was over near Mercer County. It was called actually Ledgerwood's Bend. Another proposal was made by Joseph Delaney. He had a ferry over near Craig's Creek in Woodford County. And of course, there was a gentleman by the name of Abraham Owens that put in a proposal for Louisville to be the capital of the state. But the 4 that were given the most consideration, however, were Petersburg, Leestown, Frankfort, and Lexington. Actually, you know, Leestown, which is way down on Wilkinson Boulevard, it's actually a few years older than Frankfort, as a matter of fact.
Is that right?
Each one of these 4 sites had advantages, you might say. Petersburg was actually proposed by a fellow by the name of General Scott, who later became governor of Kentucky. And he proposed a site over in Woodford County, but he withdrew his proposal after it was rejected, so to speak. And one of the reasons I guess he gave it up too was the fact that he was recalled to active duty in the military against the Indians. Number 2, Leestown was given quite a bit of consideration for 2 reasons. It was on the Kentucky River, and also because of the fine crossing that they had there at that time. Lexington had strong support because at that time it was the largest city in the state. You know what the population was at that time in Lexington?
I have no idea.
It was a little over 1,600.
Oh my goodness, it has grown, hasn't it?
That's right. But in the final analysis, really, Frankfort gained a lot from the economic standpoint because, of course, at that time, the state was in dire financial straits. So Frankfort really had strong support from, like I say, an economic standpoint.
Mayor Sower, who exactly put together the proposal to have Frankfort be the capital of Kentucky?
Very good question, Carolyn. Andrew Holmes shrewdly put together Frankfort's bid. 8 lots of public ground, $140 worth of locks and hinges, 1,590 perches of stone, 10 boxes of window glass, and enough lumber, use of the sawmills, teams, etc., and 15 kegs of nails.
Oh my goodness.
Also, substantial help came from the fact that there were 8 underwriters that committed themselves to give the state $3,000 in cash. And $3,000 in cash at that time was a lot of money. So the 5 commissioners finally decided that there was no question that Frankfort's bid was much better than any of the competitors. So what they did on December the 5th, 1792, they reported to the legislature that they recommended that Frankfort be named the capital of the state. 3 days later, the General Assembly voted to make Frankfort the capital of the state, and then they adjourned appropriately to have the next meeting in Frankfort on November the 3rd, 1793, at the home of Andrew Holmes, which was the Andrew Holmes building, I might say, was right on the corner of Wilkinson and Wapping Street, right on the corner there. Now, the house is not there, but the site, of course, is, and of course, it's right across the street from the Orlando Brown house, really. You know, Andrew Holmes continues to intrigue me. He was a very large landowner over in Lexington. He lived in Lexington. And yet, why did he work so hard to make Frankfort the capital? The only thing I can think of is the fact that he must have been a land speculator, because why would he work so hard to make Frankfort the capital? And yet, on the other hand, he must have been well thought of in Lexington, because on January the 1st, in 1801, he was elected to the Board of Trustees to govern Lexington. So we owe an awful lot, I think, to Andrew Holmes. I think one other matter that's worthy of note is the fact that, of course, back on June the 1st, 1792, Kentucky was in dire financial straits. Of course, cash was at a premium. So much so that the well-to-do Speaker of the House, Robert Breckinridge, he lent the Commonwealth of Kentucky 475 pounds of sterling. You know, at that time we dealt in pounds rather than dollars. So he lent the Commonwealth 475 pounds of sterling at 5% interest. And this is another thing I think is most important, and that is that on December the 6th, 1792, when the legislature met, probably the last time that they met in Lexington, there were only 7 pounds left in the treasury. The treasury over here, Carolyn, was a small wooden box, but that wooden box was far too large to take care of the monetary assets of the state of Kentucky.
We made some progress.
We've made a lot of progress. I think that wooden box, you know, I tried to get them the other day to let me take it and use it, and they said, "Oh, no, Mayor." He said, "If you come down here, we'll let you use it." You know, they have so many things that are stored away that are so very, very important, have so much historical value. They don't have any space. They don't have any space, Carolyn Schaefer. I want to go now, before we leave, I want to show you the little architectural drawings and structures that they've put together. We hope maybe we'll get a Kentucky History Museum. Let's go and take a look.
Okay, let's do.
See, right there is where what I was talking there, that you could get a picture of that little wooden box. Carolyn, we're just about to finish up this trip, but I thought we should come in here. This is a model of the Kentucky History Museum, or center, if you want to call it a center. We hope to have this down on Broadway, near this old Capitol building. There's so many articles, Carolyn, that are stored away that have tremendous historical value. We're not able to display them, just like that little history box that was a treasure of Kentucky. I had to ask for it. It was back in storage, and back of this building, back of Clinton Street there, they have a big warehouse, and these things are tagged and put away in boxes and everything. We don't have the room to display all of the historical articles that we should be displaying, so that we hope that the legislature will look favorably on enough money to help us get started on this new Kentucky History Center.
So we can display all of our treasures and enjoy them instead of having them boxed away
Oh,
somewhere.
you're so smart. You're exactly right.
And
And
this
I'll
is-
tell you one other thing I want you to do. I want you to work on all your legislature friends to be sure and tell them, be sure and vote for the History Museum.
Right, okay. And it's going to be at Broadway and Ann Street, right?
Right,
Okay,
right.
we have a location for it.
And Carolyn, I want to tell you how much I've enjoyed working with you today. And maybe we'll get together again for another 30 minutes or so,
Well,
okay?
I hope so. I enjoyed it too, and thank you for all the knowledge that you shared with me and all the viewers too.
And also, I want to also thank our good friend Doug,
Right, thank you, Doug.
a tremendous photographer. He's been most kind. He's helped us when we should do this or that, you know. So you know that it's going to turn out real good.
Right, he's been super. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.